Hello, welcome to Learn English with Josh. I am Josh. This episode is a very special episode because you will get to learn about me. And that's a special thing. But before I begin, I would like to give a special thank you to a new subscriber, Toya. I see you. Thank you very much. This is for you. One thing humans are very good at is talking about themselves. Can you not see? I am guilty. Another thing that humans are really good at is talking about other people. And in fact, there is a theory about the development of human language, and this theory suggests that human vocal speech developed in order for us to be able to gossip. Yes, we humans evolved this unique ability among other animals in the animal kingdom to use our vocal speech to talk about other people behind their backs without them knowing about it. But this episode is not about gossip. That was just a little tidbit of interesting information. But please feel free to gossip about me to your friends so they will subscribe to this podcast. This particular episode, we are going to talk about the past. We're going to learn how to talk about ourselves in the past, our own pasts, where we came from, where we lived, where we went to school, what we did, or where we went when we were younger. And English, the language becomes a bit tricky. It becomes a little bit difficult when we talk about our experiences in the past because the vast majority of the verbs we will use to talk about ourselves, about the things that are important to us, the things that are relevant to us, the vast majority of all these verbs are irregular verbs. And of the first 50 most common verbs in the English language, about 30 are irregular verbs. In fact, the first 16 are all irregular verbs or modal verbs like can or could. You have to be, to have, to do, to go, can, could, would. All of these most essential verbs, they're all irregular. So when we're talking about the past, we have irregular past tenses. These are verbs that we have to remember. We have to put in the effort to memorize these past tenses, these irregular past tenses. You can go to my site, Inglês, Essencial. The website is in the description. I have a list of the most frequent irregular verbs, the 101 most frequent irregular verbs, their conjugations, an audio of how to say them, of how to pronounce them. So feel free to go there and check that out. So what I'm going to offer you in this episode is a basic guide to talking about yourself, specifically talking about your past self, using my own past experience as a kind of scaffold, a structure, an outline that you can follow. And I'm going to kill two birds with one stone, as the expression goes, by gossiping about myself. Okay, so pay attention to the past tenses of the many irregular verbs that I use. Pay attention to the prepositions that I use, prepositions of time and place, all of the ins and ats and ons that we use to talk about time and location. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? In the beginning, I was born. I, Joshua Lund Cashel, was born on April 22nd, 1975. I am a Taurus. If that means anything to anybody, my zodiac sign is the bull. I'm a Taurus. Apparently, I'm very stubborn. That also means that the day I recorded this, I was 45 years old. I am turning 46 years old in just a couple of months. I am turning 46. There's a good verb for you, to turn a certain age. I was born in a small town about 30 minutes north of New York City called New Rochelle. So technically, I am a New Yorker, kind of. I was not born on the island of Manhattan or in one of the 5 boroughs, the 5 neighborhoods. I was born close enough, so I'm a New Yorker. And everyone I talk to, they always, ooh, and oh, wow, you're a New Yorker. But it's really not that impressive at all because I left New Rochelle when I was about 2. I was 2 whole years old when I left New Rochelle. I have no memory of my birth town, except, and this is the one memory that I do have, I was with my Nana, my grandmother, my mother's mother. My grandma was looking after me. She was taking care of me, and I fell. I fell and I cut my hand. I cut my hand on a piece of broken glass, and I have a scar on the palm of my right hand until today. So literally, the only thing I remember about the town I was born in is the one time my grandmother was taking care of me and I fell and cut my hand and I bled everywhere. I remember the blood. Yes, that was my early childhood, my first early childhood memories of me bleeding. Wonderful. So, when I was about 2, my family left New Rochelle and moved to Houston, Texas. I do not suggest that anyone move to Houston, Texas. Do not go there if you can avoid it. My strongest memory of Houston and my first memory of Houston was the heat, the humidity. It was like a blanket. You wore the heat in the summer. It was so hot. But it was in Houston that I formed my first real memories, my strongest memories, my most vivid memories. And I remember playing with my friends from the neighborhood. We lived in this community called Prestonwood, and it was a typical suburban neighborhood from the late 1970s, early 80s. I remember just now wearing parachute pants. Michael Jackson, red and black Michael Jackson parachute pants in Prestonwood in the early 1980s. Okay, wow. And I have really vivid memories of me and my friends playing in the front yard of my house. We would play all kinds of ball games. We would play baseball. We would play kickball. We would play a game called Bassrunner, which I just recently tried to teach my son, and he looked at me like I was crazy because I loved playing Bassrunner. He thought it was the most boring game. So if you ever played Bassrunner as a child, I guess it was a good game. I don't know. It was the 70s. It was the 80s. I remember during the summer nights, the sweltering, super humid, super hot summer nights, the sun was going down and the fireflies, these little bugs that glowed, they would start coming out. And they would come out and you could see them blinking here and there along the street in the yard. And we would catch these little fireflies in our hands. And you would open your hand and you would watch them glow. They had little butts that would burn in this yellow glow. It was really cool. And I love watching fireflies even today. I love catching fireflies. You catch them today and you open your hands and you watch their little butts glow yellow. It's a wonderful little thing. But don't worry, I always release them. Apparently, it's a very American thing to do, catch fireflies. So we would play all of these ball games in our front yard, and we would play hide and go seek in the forest behind my house. And I remember there was a hole in the fence. The fence was really tall, and you would have to squeeze through this hole to get access to the woods behind the house. And the trees, they were all pine trees because the floor of the forest was covered in a thick layer of pine needles, these red pine needles. And the older kids had this clubhouse back there in the woods. And that's where I saw my first adult magazine when I was about 6. So, yes, these were very fond memories that I have of my childhood. And I remember my parents would let us walk to and from school during the school year. And we would walk in the morning, and it was very early. And I remember walking with my brother and my friends. We actually had real lunch boxes, aluminum lunch boxes, and we would pack our lunches and we would put them into these aluminum lunch boxes, Star Wars lunch boxes, and we would walk to school. And I went to Hancock Elementary School from kindergarten to 2nd grade. And I remember very clearly in 2nd grade, before the start of every day at the school, before classes began, the entire school, all the students would make a big circle, and we would all look at the flag. We would put our right hands over our hearts, and we would repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I can remember those words because we repeated them every single day. Now, there's a discussion to be had about having to say the Pledge of Allegiance, but that's for a different episode. And we were the Hancock Hawks. That was the name of our school mascot, the Hawks, the Hancock Hawks. And I remember clearly we would play tetherball during recess. And the last year I was there, I was playing tetherball, and I almost, oh so almost, beat the best tetherball player in the school. It was so close. And I regret to this day not winning that game. I can see it in my mind's eye. That ball was so close to touching the pole. But anyways, this was a time in the late 1970s, early 1980s. This was a time when parents would put their children in the car and they would not put on the seatbelts. No one would wear seatbelts. This is a time when parents would let their children play unattended in the streets. We would run all through the neighborhood, even after dark, and there were no parents watching over us. We were free. We were like little animals. This was a time when, I remember, teachers would smoke cigarettes during class in elementary school. Yes, those were the good old days. Those were the good old days where smoking was good for you. I don't know if you have noticed this, but as I tell you about all of these things in my past, all of these experiences that I had, you might have noticed that I keep using this word would. We would play hide and seek. We would walk to school. We would catch fireflies. Our parents would not put our seatbelts on. This is a really cool grammar structure that you can use to talk about things you did in the past repeatedly. Actions that were done over and over again. It's a very natural and very colloquial way to talk about repeated actions in the past. Now, you might have heard about the used to past. For example, I used to live in Houston, Texas. I no longer live there today. My father used to work for Exxon, but now he's a high school teacher. The used to is used to describe more of states, conditions, while this would describes actions and movements and habits and routines that are repeated with some frequency in the past. So you can use this would to talk about your own past actions that you would do with some frequency. It's a really neat structure, and I suggest you use it. It adds a very natural, a very fluent element to your English. Okay, let's continue talking about me. As I said, I used to live in Houston, Texas, and when I lived there with my mother, I lived there with my father, I lived there with my older brother. He is 3 years older than me. And I also lived there with a stray dog that my brother brought home one day, and we named her Buffy. She was a mutt. She was not a pure breed dog. She was a mix between, I don't know, a beagle, a basset hound, a bloodhound, and some other dog. And she was a very good dog, and she loved to eat Snickers bars. My mother would give her a Snickers bar every day. A Snickers bar is a kind of chocolate bar, and my dog Buffy would eat a Snickers bar every day, and that's probably why she developed diabetes in her old age. My mother probably should not have given a whole entire chocolate bar every day to my dog. So I lived with my mom, my dad, my older brother, my dog Buffy, and 9 cats. And in addition to that, my mother would help raise abandoned baby birds. She would find these birds in the forest behind our house, and she would raise them until they could fly on their own, until they could live independently. And I have a perfectly clear, perfectly vivid memory of the day my mother was going to liberate this little bird she had raised from a tiny, tiny chick. And she was standing in the backyard, and she raised her hand and let that little bird fly off to freedom. And that little bird flew across the backyard and landed on the branch of a big tree we had in the backyard. And I can see this in my mind's eye. One of our cats, a little white and orange spotted cat, climbing the trunk of the tree. I can hear its claws climbing the trunk of the tree, climbing out onto the branch where that bird was sitting, and that cat jumped on that bird, grabbed it, put the bird in its mouth, climbed down the tree, and walked back to the house like it was the proudest little creature. And my mother was screaming. She was so horrified. She had put all of that effort into raising and taking care of that little bird and then setting it free for it to be immediately eaten by one of my cats. So, yet another fond memory that I have. While we were living in Houston, my father was working for a company called Exxon, which internationally is known better as Esso. It is an oil company. My father used to be an industrial engineer. He no longer is an engineer. He is now a high school math teacher. So I guess teaching is in the family. But while we were living in Houston, my father was working for this company, Exxon, and Exxon was offering its employees the opportunity to work overseas, to work abroad in a different country. And at this particular time, Exxon was offering some of its employees the opportunity to work in a little Middle Eastern country called Saudi Arabia. This was in the beginning of the 1980s, and what an amazing opportunity it was for my father to take his family without any idea what he was getting himself into and move to the Middle Eastern country of Saudi Arabia. So in 1982 or in 1983, I cannot remember, we packed everything up and we moved to a little town called Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Actually, it's more like the Haran, Saudi Arabia. I was 7 years old and I was in second grade. We landed, I believe it was in January or February, in the middle of the night with hundreds of other people from all over the world, and we began one of the most spectacular life journeys I could possibly imagine. Hey, thanks so much for listening. The purpose of this episode was to give you more or less a guide, an outline on how you can talk about yourself in the past. Different words you can use, different expressions, different grammatical structures that bring natural language to your linguistic repertoire. If you are curious and you would like to hear the rest of my story that brings us a little bit closer to the present, please go to my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Join the class, become a supporting member, and you can get access to the full story, where I will embarrass myself on several occasions as I gossip about myself in the past. Thank you so much for listening to Learn English with Josh. Thank you for my new subscribers. Take a moment to subscribe if you haven't. Tell your friends. Check out my website for some great resources to help you learn English, and stay tuned for many episodes to come. Thanks again. Bye-bye.